Iansan is finally out, and some would say that she's the second coming of our Lord and Savior of buffing, Bennett. Well, let me tell you, we are definitely entering a new age of meta, and in this Ultimate Iansan's Guide and Showcase video, I am going to explain all the best ways how to utilize Iansan's insane buffing. This includes the DPS units who benefit the most from her, how to build her efficiently, and I'll also showcase her constellations, so you can see for yourself what is the exact power level of Iansan from C0 to C6. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. So, I just got this crazy sponsored gift box from UGREEN, who are collaborating together with Genshin Impact. Check out this Knish-themed fast-charging adventure kit. There's a cute acrylic pin of him, love that. Then we've got a cable with little AHA acting as a trusty cable tie organizer. But the other three big things are, in my opinion, the most exciting. First of all, we've got this super cool 20,000 mAh power bank. Look at this, when I power it on, AHA shows up with this boot up animation. And you can track the charging and battery on the screen, so very useful. Now, this power bank supports 100 watt single port output and 130 watt dual port output. It charges up things very fast, and I'll definitely bring it on my next vacation to charge my iPad, Steam Deck, and AirPods, so I can keep doing my dailies in Genshin. Next, we have this cool wireless charger, very convenient if you want to fast charge your iPhone, and it's compact for travel. And then finally, there's the 65 watt charger, which can easily support up to 3 devices simultaneously. But obviously, one of the devices I'm going to charge it with is going to be the power bank with the AHA cable. I mean, this whole accessory box is just oozing with style. So check out these limited edition Knish themed design products by using my link in the description. Right now you can buy it for up to 30% off, and you can also enter into a massive UGREEN's giveaway. So don't miss out on this great deal. Okay, to kick things off, I'll be showcasing Iansan with Favonia's Lance and Cinder City Artifact set, which has triple attack main stats, but I'll also briefly talk about her build options in the next section. Also, her talents are 8, 10, and 10, and for now, she's Constellation 0. So when looking at her normal attacks, they're pretty cute, not gonna lie, but the damage is laughable. Although her special charge attack during Night Soul Blessing state, called Swift Stormlight, will be used in nearly every rotation, but it's still not a lot of damage, and I'd say leveling her normal attacks is like the lowest priority of them all. Moving over to her skill, it's got a decent multiplier, and when used, Iansan also enters into Night Soul Blessing state with max 54 Night Soul points. On top of that, her next charge attack will cost no stamina and trigger quickly, so that's the Swift Stormlight move I've mentioned. Now, the funny thing is, this Night Soul Blessing state when used only with the skill is kinda useless, except for world exploration, because all she can do is deliver that special charge attack and move faster. Actually, her movement almost works in a similar manner as Varessa's, so she can run on water or lava and boost her speed when dashing, and she can jump around like this. So where's that mythical attack boost you've been hearing about it then? Well, it's actually located in her burst. When she uses it, it will deal pretty good damage, and then for 12 seconds, she summons this kinetic energy scale and also grants her 15 Night Soul points. And boy oh boy, let me tell you, this is probably the most complex buff in Genshin's history because it involves tracking the efficiency of Night Soul point generation, how much the active character moves, and how high is Iansan's attack stat. Luckily, I did all the heavy lifting research, so let me share with you the info in the most simple way possible. Alright, let's start off with how the burst's attack boost actually works. So when you swap out, you can see her Night Soul bar on the team side, and there's also this little icon next to your active unit. And when she has at least 42 Night Soul points, as indicated by her cheering emoji, then the burst will always provide 27% of Iansan's attack as a buff to the active character. However, there is a maximum cap, and at level 10, it's 690 attack, so she needs to have 2556 attack, which is not that hard to reach, to be honest. Also, if you want to know if she's providing maximum attack buff at different talent levels, here's a table for reference, and you can also check her attack stat after swapping out, although if she swapped from Benny's burst, wait a second or two for it to wear off for realistic results. Still, here's the next important part. When her Night Soul bar drops below 42 points, which you can see visually here, the icon goes from Iansan cheering to this dreadful mask emoji. This means now her attack buff will start decreasing. And to save you the headache of calculations, here are some stopgaps at certain Night Soul points you can see if, for example, Iansan has 2556 attack. I would argue the most crucial thing to understand about her attack buff below 42 Night Soul points is that the more attack she has, the slower it decreases. For example, we can see at 3500 attack, she can still provide around 612 attack buff at 35 Night Soul points, and if she had 4000 attack, then she actually still maintains maximum 690 attack buff, even at 35 points. So, long story short, the more attack she has, the slower this buff degrades when going below 42 Night Soul points. Also, one really cool thing about it is that any kind of attack buff Iansan gets, it is then dynamically recalculated by the attack buff she provides, meaning things like Chevre's attack buff, Noblesse, and Tenacity set attack buffs, all of them can be utilized by Iansan to keep her attack very high. If that's not enough, units like Fischl or Xiangling can actually snapshot Iansan's attack buff, so even if it starts decreasing, their deployed attacks will still maintain the highest boost they received. Okay, so with the attack calculations out of the way, how do you actually maintain it? Well, it all has to do with movement, baby. Fitness is the keyword. Alright, seriously. So Iansan will lose 6 Night Soul points every second, but she can also gain them whenever the active unit performs any kind of movement. And by that, I literally mean if the unit swaps, jumps, plunges, has other kinds of funny movements like Movwika's bike doing donuts, and even idle animations can provide minuscule Night Soul point generation. The system tracks it in a unique way, and it's actually one of those times where spreadsheet calculations aren't super reliable because you need to do the actual testing in-game to see how good the unit is at generating those Night Soul points for Iansan. For example, in Chaska's case, she can reliably maintain over 42 Night Soul points as long as you keep moving with her while delivering those charged shots. Same goes for Kinich. Constant movement allows him to fully maximize Iansan's buff super easily. However, if we look at Arlecchino, if I do something like normal attack 3 into dash cancel away from the enemy and then start attacking again, this usually is enough to maintain maximum attack buff as well, because her animations naturally move her a lot, and dash canceling helps too. And usually with any plunge attacker, it will be enough to maintain maximum buff as well, like Varesa, Xiao, and Gaming. If that's not enough, if playing with Shenyun and using someone to quickly do plunge attacks, they are also able to usually maintain the max attack buff. But there are also some really weird cases when it comes to burst animation movement. For example, it seems like Clarence does a ton of movement with her burst, but in reality she gains not that much, at least from my own testing. And then you really need to make sure she keeps lunging effectively to maintain the attack buff. However, in Movwika's case, even when we see Iansan's bar is halfway depleted, the Pyro Archon's burst animation probably jumps into the sky because we can see a lot of points were generated for Iansan. But then we have some sad cases too, like with Keqing, whose burst supposedly makes her move a lot, but even after it and doing her usual combo, I wasn't able to maintain the highest attack buff. Still, some of these issues with lack of movement will be addressed with C4, which I'll talk about later on. But right now, I would say these are the characters who are efficient at maintaining max attack buff, while some others shown here will still benefit from it, but it probably won't be maintained at the maximum. Keep in mind, we're still in very early testing stages, and Iansan is quite complex for theory crafters, so these results are definitely not final. But yeah, the other key thing to keep in mind is the first passive. Remember that swift Stormlight attack she does? Well, after doing it, Iansan gains this precise movement buff for 15 seconds, and it will first increase her own attack by 20%, but on top of that, when during the burst she regains Night Soul points, she will gain 1 more. However, if the active character consumes or restores their own Night Soul points, then Iansan will gain 4 more points instead. This will happen every 2.8 seconds, and in a nutshell, Natlan units are simply better at maintaining Iansan's attack buff compared to others, which is funny because it's Natlan units who move the most as well, usually. Now, Iansan can also heal, but frankly, it's nothing amazing. Whenever anyone triggers Night Soul Burst, for 10 seconds when Iansan restores Night Soul points, she'll also heal the active character by 60% of her attack, which usually can range between 1.5 to 2.5k heals. But the thing is, because this passive starts ticking the moment Night Soul Burst is triggered, and it only happens every 2.8 seconds, so 3 times at most, the healing in the end is just abysmal for things like gaining fanfare points for Furina. And this is the reason why Iansan won't replace many Bennett teams where healing is required. They can work together, most definitely, but teams that depend on healing, well, let's just say no matter how you build Iansan, it just won't be that impactful unless to heal some light wounds. But yeah, overall her rotation is going to be super simple. You swap to her, do her skill, then attack to unleash that special charge attack, use the burst and swap out. Now making sure you keep moving with the active character to maintain her attack buff. And you can see her own personal damage contribution isn't going to be big. Even with all the crits and Chevre's resistance shred, it still amounts to roughly 60,000 total damage, which is fine, but she shines best as a buffer. Anyway, enough yapping about how her kit works. Let's quickly take a look at some builds. Look, ultimately, Iansan has very few weapon choices to go for. Favonius Lance, more or less, is her best in slot choice. The amount of energy recharge, base attack, and particles she gains from it is simply too good. But if you can't use it, then the next best option would be the event-exclusive Lantern Polearm that was available not long ago. It's got great stats and great passive, so it will be easy to achieve high attack for Iansan. Then there's Moonpiercer, which I only recommend using with Kinich or other Dendro teams, but it's also possible she might then struggle with energy requirements. And then as for 5-star options, literally any high base attack option is fine, although Calamity Queller comes to mind because it also gives more attack from passive, while the standard 5-star Skyward Spine is also decent, since it has 674 base attack and provides ER from substat. Still, in the majority of cases, if you have Favonius Lance, I highly recommend using that. Now, as for artifact sets, Cinder City is absolutely a must-have because at C0 especially, Iansan's attack, while great, is not as impressive as Bennett's, and Cinder City helps even out this problem quite well, to the point where C0 Iansan is almost as good as C6 Benny with high base attack sword for teammates like Varessa, all thanks to that beefy buff Cinder City gives. However, in some cases, Iansan might not need Cinder City if she's in a team with Shilonen or Citlali. Then you can equip her on Noblesse set. But the problem here is that Cinder City is really good at fixing Iansan's energy requirements. Like, sure, she can actually generate and catch 4 electro particles, and with Favonius Lance equipped, it's even easier, but even then, her energy requirements are quite high without Cinder City 2-set bonus. Speaking of which, when looking at main stats, usually it's gonna be triple attack, but in some cases, she might want energy recharge sans if she can't activate the burst reliably, or she might be even able to use critical rate circlet in teams with Chevre's, who provides her own attack boosting, allowing Iansan to focus a little more on her damage. Honestly, the best way to determine is to see if Iansan can hit the max attack cap when looking at this, and then see which main stats are best. But again, usually it's gonna be either triple attack or ER attack. Finally, as for substats, just focus as much as possible on attack percent and energy recharge. If using Favonius Lance, try to get at least 50% critical rate. And then, as for the actual energy recharge requirements, oh man, they will differ a lot. But for example, in this Varessa team comp, it's enough to have around 120%, so with Favonius Lance, it's already overcapped. But in other teams, especially if there's no Electro Resonance, then it can be as high as 150%. But without Favonius Lance, it could be 200% as well. Although in most teams, I'd say usually it's going to be around 120% on average, so that's why Favonius is such a great pick, since it will also help her even more with those generated white particles. Now, we already know that units who move a lot will benefit the most from Iansan, but does she actually improve any existing teams? Well, first of all, for some teams where she does not activate before the main damage dealer, if those units in between don't move a lot, the buff will be much weaker when it's time for the main DPS to use it. This will be addressed in her Constellations section, but for now, let's talk about some top teams. And starting with the non-obvious picks first, while Tignati doesn't move a lot, his field time is very short, so even with reduced attack buff, he can still utilize it quite well in some quickened teams, although he also benefits more from EM stat. Same goes for Ayato with Fischl. While he won't get the full buff, Fischl will snapshot it easily, and you can go for a team like this one. Then, if we look at Ayaka, Iansan actually becomes a good option against bosses by replacing Hydro units, who won't help with freezing them anyway. Still, usually it's best to keep moving with Ayaka while Burst is unleashed to keep the attack high. But how about some Child teams? More specifically, International. Yeah, it's pretty decent. Again, Child doesn't move a lot, but he can use good amount of that buff with his big burst attack when it's vaped, and Xiangling will snapshot the buff too. Notice how Benny is used in this team. This is one of few examples where they both work. Alhaitham is also one of those cases where he can maintain the attack buff, and in his case, it's best to use Iansan in quicken teams. But moving over to some more obvious teams that can easily maintain the attack buff, How about Gaming? I know there's like 5 of you using him, but this team of Benny, Rosaria, Iansan, and Gaming is legit probably one of the hardest hitting free-to-play team comps right now, easily reaching high ceilings of damage, although Gaming has to be C6 for this to be relevant. Now, as for Mavwika, if we take a look at the most meta team right now, which is Shilonen, Benny, and Silali, Iansan is actually best utilized if she replaces Shilonen, because resistance shred stacked both from Shilonen and Silali is just less efficient than stacking a lot of attack with Benny and Iansan. But in all honesty, she can replace Benny or Silali as a side grade too, although keep in mind with multiple Cinder City sets, you will need to decide who holds it, and I highly recommend Silali has it due to her higher energy recharge needs. Moving over to Varessa, at this point, I've made 2 videos about her with Iansan, and long story short, Iansan is simply the best teammate for her to have. Almost essential, quite honestly, so yeah. And as for Kinich, his current best team, Benny, Emily, Mavwika, well, honestly, any of them can be replaced, depending on your needs, but most importantly, it will be much easier to maintain Cinder City buff with Iansan as well. And if you replace Benny, you don't have to play around Circle Impact. Now, as for Chaska, I'll be frank, at C0, she's not the most amazing replacement for meta teammates like Farina, Benny, Sitlali, or Mavwika, but once she has more Constellations, things do change a bit, and I'll talk about more of this in a moment. But Daddy Arlecchino teams are gonna be pretty good, especially if you utilize dash cancels to keep her in motion, although I'd say she will work better in Chever's teams, but due to the rotation demanding Iansan to start after Arlecchino, when finally switching back to Father, it will most likely be less than 42 Night Soul points. However, once Iansan unlocks C4, this should be no longer the issue. And then, yeah, we also have Clorand. She honestly struggles with maintaining the attack buff before Iansan's C4, although if you do play this comp, it's best to go for Chever's teams. But what about Xiao? He plunges a lot, he moves a lot, right? Well, the reason why I didn't mention any Animal or Geo teams until this point, Iansan can't trigger reactions on these elements, so no Cinder City buff, which is a huge selling point to use, especially for C0 Iansan. Still, you could go with Benny and Farazan if you really want to, and she does get better with Constellations for Xiao. You know what? Let's just talk about them. Alright, quick overview of each constellation because they are quite impactful. So at C1, Iansan quite simply will regain 15 energy when her burst is being used every 18 seconds. So basically this reduces her burst cost from 70 to 55. This may or may not be huge, depends on which team you're using her, but overall I'd say it's a very good constellation to have, especially if you cannot use Favonius Lance. But C2 is where power starts showing up. First of all, now her burst by default activates her first passive, so no need to do that special charge attack, although in rare cases you might still need it to apply enough Electro. However, the other big part here is that she now also provides 30% attack boost to the active character from the first passive, which is especially great if that active unit cannot maintain the maximum attack buff. Still, moving over to C3, this is an absolutely meh constellation, skill damage is just not that impressive, and extra 3 levels mean barely anything in grand scheme of things. However, C4? Man, this is a big power spike for Iansan. Basically now when she uses the burst, the next 2 other unit bursts will restore 4 Night Soul points for her, and this can fix some team comps efficiency, like for Arlecchino, Clorand, Tignari teams, or especially when Iansan's burst is used early in the rotation before the main DPS, so the other units who cast the burst after her will help maintain the maximum attack buff for a while. But most importantly, when Night Soul points overflow, 50% of it will be used on next time she gains Night Soul points, and this is mostly relevant for C6. Now, C5 is also pretty nice. Basically, extra 3 levels to burst means bigger attack buff she can provide, and now she will need exactly 3000 attack to fully provide the 810 attack buff at level 13. Honestly, it's not the biggest buff, since it's like bonus 120 attack over level 10, but it's still a decent buff to most units. Finally, we have C6. The most important part is right here. Her burst duration is increased by 3 seconds for a total of 15 seconds now. This might not seem like a lot, but for quite a few DPS units, this will be quite relevant, and it just simply tidies up a lot of rotations that otherwise feel a bit lacking. But of course, there's also another nice bonus. Whenever Iansan's Night Soul points overflow, the active unit will gain 25% damage bonus for 3 seconds. And from my testing so far, Mavwika, Kinich, Varessa, Gaming, and Xiao are the only ones that managed to get this overflow to work with. I mean, sometimes you can get one trigger for this buff to work on a lot of units, but maintaining it is a different story. So interestingly enough, this is more or less relevant for some Natlan units and plunge attackers. Overall, it's pretty clear that Iansan is going to shake things up a lot when it comes to team building, although the ones who will benefit the most, or at least the most reliably, are going to be the units who keep moving, especially if they are from Natlan. Still, I know some of you might be wondering, does she need Constellations? Honestly, I'd say C2 is a fine stopping point, while C1 just helps sort out her energy needs. But C4 and C6, in my opinion, are biggest upgrades, but not enough to say that she's bad without them. However, for some teams like Kinich, Arlecchino, or even Chaska, compared to Benny Boy, Iansan might not theoretically offer as much buffing as him, but with C4 or C6, usually she can then be a better option. However, her goal is not to replace or be better than Bennett. Heck, they can easily work together, and they do in several teams, so it's more like the case of Yelan with Xingqiu, but it's pretty clear Iansan's healing is just pathetic, frankly. So you won't be able to play Furina comps with just Iansan as the sole healer. But yeah, I hope you found this video interesting. Not gonna lie, I haven't slept much. Wanted to get this guide out as soon as possible. So I'd really appreciate it if you could press the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and see you next time.